Hi, and welcome to Gartner Live. Today, we're going to hear for the first time the results of the Gartner Cmo Spend Survey. I'm Heather Pemberton Levy, and I'm joined by Ewan McIntyre, Vice President and Analyst at Gartner for Marketers. Hi, Ewan. Hi, Ewan. Can you hear me? Okay, we seem to be having some sound issues. We're going to get Ewan up in just a minute, and we're going to talk about the Cmo Spend Survey. And this is released every year. It's Gartner's opportunity to check in with CMOs around the globe on what they're planning on spending on their budgets, on their strategy, and on their operations. It's been a very challenging year in particular, and we're going to find out the kinds of cuts they made and what they made as far as choices, in particular when it comes to their operations and their budgets and strategies. This data is just being released, and as soon as we can get Ewan up, he's going to give us a glimpse into the actual results and talk to us about what happened when they had to make those choices, what they're saying their different capabilities are, and what their most important capabilities are as far as priorities, and how they're going to handle that. So I'm just going to check in with my team. Ewan, are you back?
I am, yes, I am.
Great.
Sorry about the technical difficulties there.
No worries. I was riffing there for a minute, but thanks for joining us. And what we want to do is check in. Listen, we know that CMOs, like many executives, had to make budget cuts early in the year. So can you give us a top line on what we heard from the CMO Spend Survey as far as where their heads are at as they address this year in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, apologies for the late entrance there. We're all having to adapt to the new normal. But yeah, the situation that we're seeing from the CMO Spend Survey this year is that just under half of CMOs reported that they had experienced some kind of budget cut in 2020. Now, that's slightly lower than we'd seen earlier in the year with some of the polls that we took in the early part of the COVID crisis, but it's still a really significant number of CMOs who are facing budgetary challenges right now, especially if you think that 11% of respondents had faced a budget cut already of more than 15% of their budget. So, the interesting thing is that budgets had started pretty well at the beginning of the year, at around about 11% of company revenue going to marketing, but already CMOs facing cuts. And we anticipate that there will be more cuts to come as well, because those initial cuts were to deal with the cash flow issues that came from drops in demand. As we get into the latter part of 2020 and going into 2021, there's clearly going to be the kind of economic shock that follows the healthcare crisis, and there'll be a future look towards profitability. So, yeah, early stages are at the very least about half of CMOs have faced a cut so far.
Right. And I'm going to get into the next question in a minute, but I should have welcomed you, but we were dealing with our little crisis there. So thank you for joining us. Next, I want to tell our viewers that we will be taking their questions at the end of the program. So feel free to post them in the comments, and we'll get to as many as we can when we finish. But let's actually talk about how CMOs addressed the pandemic right when it hit. A lot of executives had to take actions right out of the gate. What did we see? What types of actions did CMOs take, and how did they address the pandemic in their organizations?
Yeah, so I guess you could break these into negative and non-negative, which sounds like a funny way of putting it, but non-negative responses. So if we focus on the kind of negative reactions that came in the early respond phases of the crisis, as we call it at Gartner, you saw a bunch of fairly typical activities happening. So, of course, customer-facing events were cancelled. Some campaigns that had been planned were cancelled, of course, as well. And we had things like, the impact on headcounts was, of course, something that was an area of focus, especially when it comes down to the kind of contractor headcounts within marketing organizations. Those are pretty typical responses that you would expect. But we also saw some, as I say, non-negative actions that had happened as a result of the crisis as well. So over 60% of CMOs responded that they had created COVID-specific communications. So a shift of marketing budget towards those kind of activities. which is really important. We also saw a large number of respondents saying that they had invested in listening tools and activities to be able to understand the sentiment and feelings of their customers in the middle of this really big crisis, to understand how they could shift their messaging and communications. So not just negative actions that happened out of this. We saw lots of CMOs acting in a very agile way and responding with positivity and facing up to the challenge that the crisis presented them.
And many of us are familiar with the commercials we've seen on television over the last several months, right? So I think it depends on the brand, how they were able to potentially turn this into, shall we say, a positive brand opportunity. Can you talk a little bit about those different types of brands, or what it meant for various types of industries when it comes to how they reacted and the different types of impact?
Yeah, so alongside the Cmo Spend Survey, we've got lots of great research about the different responses that brands take and the different impact on different kinds of industries as well. I think that we all have seen plenty of brand messages now that are focused on the unprecedented times in which we live. And I think that that was a very strong focus, definitely at that respond phase. But you also saw that, where there were opportunities for some brands, actually, there was an increase in budget for some of the respondents to the survey, I should say, that about 33% of our respondents saw their budgets increase in 2020 so far. And you can see that through IT and business services brands and brands on the media side, that there was a huge amount of upside as a result of the crisis. So those were brands that were able to really shift their messaging and really stand up to the opportunities that the crisis offered. If you think about the IT and business services example, a huge amount of us, like we are right now, had to move towards working from home. So the opportunities for IT and business services brands to really step up to that challenge and to help their customers was an important opportunity, and similarly with media. So it's not a wholly negative story. I think the interesting thing is, as we go into the next two phases of the crisis, though, as I say, that we have the early respond phase of the crisis. We've also got to look at how we move in towards recovery and renewal as well. And as we do that, I think the messaging and the opportunities that brands will see and how they adapt their budget and strategy is going to be incredibly important. One of the things that has been incredibly important about this thus far, though, as I mentioned earlier on, has been the agility with which CMOs have changed their strategy. And we saw this coming through in the survey, that there was a large number of respondents who had made changes to the strategy and had seen some impact on their performance in the year. I think as the year progresses and as we see the changing shape of this crisis, that how those CMOs continue to be agile, how they continue to adapt their strategy and spending habits is going to be incredibly important to getting onto that next phase.
Right. And I'm curious how they do that across the functions in the marketing organization, right? We live that in our own marketing organization. So what are they looking at in terms of, say, agency spend? We've read in our research about in-house, and we were writing about this before, but now there's special concerns. So I believe the survey results showed some nuances in what they bring in-house versus what they keep with the agencies. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. So in-housing has definitely been a trend that we have tracked for some time, and we've seen perhaps an acceleration in in-housing as a result of the crisis. So 33%, just under 33% of work has moved from external agencies in-house in 2020, and the intention is that will continue going into 2021. But the interesting element about this is that the amount that we actually spend with external agencies as a proportion of the total marketing budget has gone up. And it talks about the volume versus value play that we have when it comes down to our organization design. And of course, what we outsource to agencies is an important element of organization design. So you touched on this a second ago, that some of the things we asked in the survey about what are the capabilities that you're bringing in-house. And you could argue that the capabilities that are being brought in-house are perhaps lower margin. You could even call some of these commoditized elements within the marketing capability mix. So things like, social marketing management is one of the top items that was shown on there. And I think one of the important things to point out about this, in-housing is not just a cost-saving exercise, and nor should it be. But if your driving force behind in-housing, or at least one of the key objectives behind in-housing, is to drive down costs, and you're bringing in some of those lower margin elements within the mix, you're not necessarily going to meet that objective. Another part of really important Gartner research that I know we've talked about in the past on this forum is the Magic Quadrant for Global Marketing Agencies. And another piece of research I happen to work on, and we talk every year with these large marketing agencies, and they talk about the fact that they're moving their services towards higher margin strategic services. So it kind of makes sense that spend with agencies is still incredibly strong. And it kind of makes sense that despite this big shift of volume in-house, that we haven't seen an erosion of agency spend. Again, it's early in 2020, and I know that agency costs are something that CMOs are continuing to look at as they go through some fairly difficult times and some of the cost optimization challenges that they'll face. So looking at what that mix between in-house and outsource looks like toward the end of the year will also be incredibly interesting. But one thing's for sure, there's been no precipitous drop away in agency spend at this point in time.
Okay, that's significant. What about marketing technology, MarTech, as we refer to it? What are we seeing there? Are contracts being renewed? Or how are marketers thinking about that? It's a significant part of their operations.
Definitely. And marketing technology has been a very interesting area of investment over a number of years. This year, it's been really interesting to see the faith that CMOs have placed in marketing technology as their path out of this crisis. So we've seen marketing technology investment stand up incredibly strongly this year. 26% of the total marketing budget is now allocated towards marketing technology on average. And that makes it the largest single allocation of budget across the different resource areas. And by that, I mean, if we break this down into 4 areas of technology, labor, media, and agencies. I knew there was a 4th one there somewhere. So a very strong area of investment in 2020, and a strong commitment to grow that investment into 2021. And that data, it really is backed up by some qualitative insights that we have from CMOs as well. Because we asked CMOs in one of our pieces of research that came before the Cmo Spend Survey about a month ago, why they had such faith in marketing technology. Now, one of the key reasons for that is that they understand that that their existing customers will be part of their growth and part of their story towards renewal over the next year. So they understand that marketing technology plays an incredibly important part in understanding and tailoring experiences towards those customers. So investing in technology has been a really important part of what they protect when they are facing budgetary difficulties. I think the interesting element about that, though, is that we have other Gartner research, such as the Marketing Technology Survey, which shows that there is a degree of underutilization in marketing technology. So whilst it's a solid bet to grow your understanding and your capabilities, it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's a safe bet. So making sure that you're investing in the right technology and having the capabilities to be able to use that is also really important consideration.
Right. Very important. I want to shift to advertising. We are all, I think I can say this safely, spending a lot of time in front of screens, whether it's television. I know I'm watching a lot of television at night. There's no place to go. Well, a little bit now, but still staying at home a lot. We're on screens all day. What are brands doing when it comes to advertising?
Yeah, so the whole media mix this year was very interesting. It's the first year that we've seen a really significant jump up in digital for a number of years. So about a quarter of the total budget across channels is now going to paid digital channels, and so that is paid search alongside other paid digital channels there. So a really significant chunk of the budget is going towards these paid digital channels. But as you say, it's not the only show in town. That offline has held up pretty well, coming in at just under 10% of the total marketing budget going to those offline channels. I think the interesting thing, if you dig into some of the other Gartner research, is who is investing in offline, or who did invest as well in the middle of the crisis. So just as you saw some of the brands in travel and hospitality perhaps pull back on their traditional media investments as their demand fell away, you saw other brands step in there. Retail brands and CPG brands really step up their advertising on traditional channels. and also again showing their agility in changing their creative and building the kind of messages of reassurance that were required to really connect with their customers. So a really interesting mixed picture when it comes down to channel mix. I think the other thing that's worth pointing out this year as well is that 80% of the marketing budget across channels has now gone to digital channels, whether they be paid, owned, or earned channels. So a significant benchmark, a really large proportion of the budget going towards digital this year.
Right. Okay, we are about to get to the next question. We will also be taking your questions from viewers in a little bit. We have some coming in already, so we can only take so many. So if you want us to get to yours, please post it, and we will take those in just a couple minutes. Now, Ewan, another one of the areas that we ask in our annual CMO Spend Survey is what capabilities CMOs view as most important in their marketing organizations. What did we hear this year in particular?
Yeah, very interesting year when it comes down to capabilities as well. And year over year, we've seen analytics be placed as the topmost capability. We asked the question about what are the capabilities that are most important to achieving the strategy. And analytics, of course, has had a really strong run at the top of that list. And it's understandable that it has. But this year, we've actually seen it being replaced by brand. So brand was nestling towards the bottom of that list in previous years, but it's actually got jumped right up to the top of the list in 2020. And I think it speaks of the challenges that a lot of brands have had to face this year, that they've had to adapt their messages very, very quickly to think about what they mean to their customers and stakeholders in the face of COVID, but also in the face of things like Lives Matters. It's one of those challenges for brands where they have perhaps not really thought for a long time about what they mean and how they have to think about their purpose and their meaning to their customers when it comes down to some of these really consequential moments. But it's definitely injected some impetus. So yeah, definitely brand strategy has jumped to the very top of the list. Analytics is still there in second place, but the interesting thing about analytics is that we ask CMOs to rank their top 3 capabilities, and analytics lost about 10 percentage points year over year. So
Really?
it's interesting. Yeah, absolutely. So the interesting thing is that, of course, analytics will be central to that challenge of understanding your customer and building the experiences and optimizing those experiences to that customer. But I think that the idea that data will answer everything is perhaps being replaced by an idea that you also have to have the kind of meaningful brand that connects with your audiences there as well. So an interesting interplay between those two very different capabilities.
Right. Now it's interesting because we've written about, our research has covered purpose-driven brands and the importance of that for some time. And we've seen so many organizations have seen this fast forward of strategy during this pandemic period, right? Where you move so quickly to do something that you've probably maybe been slow to adopt in regular times. So it sounds like this purpose-driven brand has really shifted to become a priority for so many marketing organizations because it's, as you say, there are these cultural events and touchstones that are really requiring it to come to the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that the interesting thing is that this will not end in 2020 or whenever we manage to tackle the COVID-19 crisis, that there are lots and lots of other challenges that will come along for brands, whether they be environmental challenges or whatever 2021, 2022 will present. So I think this has been an inflection point when it comes down to brands. But smart brands will realize that they should always have been thinking about this stuff and always been thinking about what they mean to their audiences. I mentioned earlier on that one of the interesting things we'd seen from the COVID crisis is an increase in activity around listening to what customers think. A really important part about being a meaningful brand is understanding what your audiences think about you and responding in an appropriate way. And smart brands will continue to use the impetus that they've got through COVID and take this forward into 2020 and 2021.
Okay. All right. Before we move to our audience questions, I have a couple more for you, some broader ones. As we and in that vein, as we look beyond these immediate challenges, What did we hear from CMOs as they look out into 2021 and their budgets and their priorities? What are they saying they expect?
So this is perhaps the most interesting part of the survey this year. Um, we have a period of really significant uncertainty, of course, but I think one of the surprising things that we've seen this year is the level of positivity of CMOs heading into 2021, and an expectation that this crisis will be short-lived. Now, I think that's actually quite troubling, because there are a lot of bets placed on this being a swift V-shaped recovery, and that's not necessarily, well, that is a scenario, but it's not necessarily the only scenario out there. So whilst we talked about earlier on, almost 50% of CMOs expecting some budget cuts, we asked about the impact of the business and economic climate on performance over the next 18 to 24 months. And a really significant 73% of respondents thought that the impact would be positive, not just that they would bounce back to something, acceptable, but they would have a positive performance in the next 18 months. Now, I think that significantly underplays the fact that the COVID crisis is a health crisis that masks an economic crisis, and that at the very least CMOs should be thinking about scenarios that account for different outcomes for different situations that might occur. One of the interesting things, which I'm sure we'll come on to in a second, is about how CMOs make sure that they have the sort of scenarios in place that that plan for the best but also expect the worst. That there needs to be a forward-looking, value-based approach to building budgets that anticipates that a range of different scenarios might play out. So I found that quite a troubling element of the data there, that there was such a significant level of positivity going into the next 18 to 24 months. The interesting thing about it is, if you roll back to the 2019 Cmo Spend Survey, it's perhaps not as surprising as you would think, because we asked last year about the indicators that CMOs were using to understand the threats and opportunities on the horizon. And at that time, we spoke about how those indicators were pretty much internally focused and very near term as well. And it just is playing out this year that again, there seems to be a sense that by looking at the wrong indicators, perhaps we're building an overly optimistic view of the future. And whilst we hope that optimism is justified, there's always the opportunity, there's always the sense that might not actually be the case. And building scenarios and adaptable strategies that will help respond to different challenges is incredibly important.
It does seem a curious response. And because Gartner has been doing pulse surveys across the C-suite, we have results from other executives and CMOs peers. And how does this stack up against those types of results and what we're hearing from other leaders?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is it is mismatched. So I work a lot with my colleagues on the Gartner for Finance Leaders practice, and as you mentioned, that they're taking polls of CFOs on a fairly regular basis. And what we saw from a recent data point is that 60% of CFOs are building in scenarios that have a W-shaped outcome. And also another potential situation that's coming through there is, again, another poll of CFOs asked about the areas in the enterprise that are likely to get the largest cuts heading into 2021, and marketing is second only to real estate. And if you think about the massive shift to working from home, that you should not take any comfort that you're in second place rather than being in first place. So
I like to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a challenge, and I think again it's something that I've spoken about and written about over a number of years, which is it might be an uncomfortable relationship that CMOs have with CFOs, but it's one that we really need to foster, and we need to get closer to CFOs so that we don't have this massive gulf between the kind of expectations that we have and the expectations that they have, because ultimately they will be controlling the budget that we get as a marketing organization. So yeah, an area of a fairly significant disconnect at this point in time.
Right. It definitely is a lot to consider, and it sounds as though the research will there'll be more context in the full research, and there is a webinar on this, which we'll talk more about at the end of the program. But Ewan's going to be leading it on the 15th. So if you want more details, you can watch that. Okay, let's get to some viewer questions. We have one from Shantanu in Mumbai who asks, is CMO demand for marketing automation tools going up or down globally? So getting back to that MarTech question, did you have any sense of that?
We don't in this survey. It's a great question. And I mentioned earlier on our partner survey. We run lots and lots of surveys throughout the year, and one of them is our marketing technology survey. And that will be coming a little bit later in the year. So what I would advise is, we can look at this is largely a budget and strategy survey. So we can look at the macro level of investment in marketing technology. And of course, an element of that will be around that particular area of functionality. But I would definitely hang fire for the upcoming LinkedIn Live, I'm sure, around the marketing technology survey later in the year.
Okay. This one's a little bit more budget focused. Thierry from France asks, are CMOs reconsidering CapEx allowance to foster customer retention loyalty programs in this time of crisis to drive down costs?
Well, again, it probably is a level of detail more than we would get into in the survey around how the costs are being structured, but I think I can get to some of the answer there. So one of the questions that we asked in the survey is around the paths to growth in 2021. And one of the things that we saw is that there was a strong focus on addressing existing markets and existing customers. Just under 80% of respondents said that they were looking towards their existing markets and existing customers. And actually fairly significant, around about a third of respondents said it was to focus on existing markets and existing products as well. So the idea is that there has been a move away from customer acquisition being the path to growth for a large proportion of respondents. And I know that markets don't equal customers, but we did drill into how you're expecting to get that growth from your existing markets there as well. So some indicators that there has been a move towards a risk-averse strategy. Interestingly, we also asked about the risk tolerance of CMOs and marketers in the survey as well, and it indicated again that there is a significant majority of CMOs who have a risk-averse outlook in 2020, almost certainly as a result of the COVID crisis, but perhaps doesn't answer the CapEx question specifically, but I think it gives some indications of where the heads of CMOs are right now.
Right. Thank you. Mark from Frankfurt asks, in a lot of domains, we shifted from on-site activities to remote, particularly in services delivery. Are we seeing the CMO budget shift to this change?
Yeah, so again, this accounts for the huge 80% of budget that's going towards digital channels right now. And the interesting thing is that for example, event spend held up pretty well in the total marketing budget breakdown. Now, you could argue, and we have written fairly extensively, that some of that is shifting these events and interactions to online. But I think the interesting thing as we get towards the back end of the year will be how many of those events that we had pushed back, we'd rescheduled, will then have to be delivered as virtual events as well. So I think the short answer is yes, we have seen, not just through this survey, but through lots and lots of different data points that we have at Gartner, a shift towards digital delivery. I think the interesting thing will be how that pans out. And how, if we continue to have a situation where we have to have either reimposition of social distancing or we have additional difficulties having face-to-face interactions with our customers and clients, how this pans out for the rest of the year and events budgets on the whole.
Right. All right, our last question from Sal in Toronto, who asks, what are CMOs seeing as the most effective social media strategies and programs during the pandemic?
Yeah, that's probably a different LinkedIn Live as well. And I would definitely defer to my colleague Jay Wilson, who I know has been an able contributor towards this in the past. It's not necessarily my area of expertise, but what I would say is that we live in interesting times when it comes down to investment in social. And I think one of the interesting things that we don't touch on in the Cmo Spend Survey is around how brands think about the social channels that they invest in right now and how that aligns with their brand values as well. So it's perhaps opening up another question rather than answering that question specifically, but I think there's a lot of interesting movement in social at the moment, and we see lots of brands making statements around, for example, that their stance around Facebook, for example. So I think it's more nuanced than just simply what we can see in this level of granularity in this survey, which is how much you're investing in those channels. I would definitely stay tuned for other Gartner research that we have around what that means in terms of the specifics of channel execution.
Great. Thank you so much, Ewan. We appreciate your taking the time to share with us the highlights and seeing it through the technical difficulties in the beginning. We're so glad all of you were able to join us as well. If you'd like more facts and results from the Cmo Spend Survey results for 2020, please join Ewan at our live webinar on July 15th. You can register at gartner.com/en/marketing/event/webinars, or you can just search for Gartner webinars and sort by marketing and you'll find it there. And if you miss it on the 15th, you can watch it on demand. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.